Hello, I'm Warren Watson, the director of the Journalism Ideas Initiative at Ball State University. This DVD, Following the Money, was developed as an introduction to business journalism and a teaching tool for your high school classes. The DVD features a panel of distinguished experts. Andrew Leckey, the director of the Donald W. Reynolds National Center for Business Journalism at API. Vicki Elmer, the assistant managing editor for business at the Indianapolis Star. Daniel Lee, a business reporter and columnist at the San Jose Mercury News. John Ketzenberger, the managing editor of the Indianapolis Business Journal. And finally, Lori Demo, who directs the news and editorial sequence at Ball State's Department of Journalism. She is a former business editor at USA Today. This DVD is broken into 3 parts. First, a discussion of the importance of business. 2, a look at the mechanics of teaching business journalism. And 3, an interview with Daniel Lee, a Ball State alum who has found career success in business journalism. Business stories are everywhere. Once upon a time, the institutions of business, government, and unions were in balance. Over the years, particularly since 1980, the deregulation of business and industry and the decline of manufacturing unions have left business in a dominating position. Newspapers and other media have found that they must do a better job in covering this new reality. What can an advisor do to get more comfortable with the topic of business? Are there resources, things to read? So if an advisor wanted to include maybe a day or 2 of business journalism in a curriculum, how could they do that? How can they get over that phobia of business?
Well, as I mentioned, businessjournalism.org is a way to kind of get into the topics if anyone is interested in that. But I think reading just finding and clipping the more interesting stories about business. If you're going to have them do a story, you don't necessarily want them to have them explain the economics of a vulcanizing plant. You want to have them write about something that is interesting to them, maybe consumery, something that hooks with them. Read the Wall Street Journal regularly, I would suggest to all of the advisors, and see the good writing that is there, and use examples of the good writing that you see. Entertaining, interesting stories. Ultimately, business journalism is about people, and what makes it interesting is how it affects people, people involved, and have it very touchy-feely. History doesn't mean much if you're just talking about broad sweeps of history, but it means something if there are individuals and people and how it affected people and how it affects our lives today. And I think the main emphasis is to find things that directly affect them, whether it is buying something on eBay or why they download their music. How does somebody make money from that? Why do they make money from that? Do you buy all your sporting goods used? Why? Because you can get it through these places that offer all of these sorts of things that are easily reachable by them. That's not something that they have to work out an economic model for. And in terms of being more understanding of things, I'd say just read all the business sections so that the teacher really has a better sense of economics and business. An advisor should read an entire paper, and that includes the business section. If you don't like sports, you should still read the sports section, because you're teaching your students about all the different areas that they may one day have to cover.
Try to find a guardian angel. It could be a business reporter in your community. It could be a businessman. It could be somebody from the Chamber of Commerce. It could be somebody from the Better Business Bureau. It could be somebody from any of those places, but someone who can relate to you, who can relate to your students, and who's willing to come in now and then and just talk for 10 or 15 minutes and say, have you considered this? Have you thought about this? Or this is why this works this way. There are probably tons of resources in your community and people who would just be thrilled to be asked to come and be involved.
Salaries are increasing along the same lines. This is an area where I think people have a real opportunity if they're able to read a balance sheet or to read government documents or to just be able to tell an interesting story. The combination of all of those things makes you a very valuable commodity, and a person leaving college can step into a pretty good job with pretty good pay pretty quickly.
Mm-hmm. Lori, you were a business editor at USA Today.
Mm-hmm.
Did you find also that that specialists had better opportunities at newspapers?
Oh, absolutely, and this was a long time ago. It was difficult to go out and find people who, as Vicki said and others have said, can tell stories in a way that everyone can understand. Business pages did used to be very specialized for people who were steeped in financial knowledge, but they're not anymore. A lot of people, as we've said, have stocks and bonds, they have some money, they want to know how to spend their money wisely. And so, boy, if you can tell those stories for the average reader, you've got a career made.
Papers from the, very tiny papers, much smaller than the Star, to the Wall Street Journal are looking for talented business journalists. I get called all the time asking me about prospects and also asking me for names of prospects, of people who understand how to tell business stories in a way that regular people can relate to, because newspapers have to write for, the secretaries, the truck drivers, as well as the CEOs.
No, the best ethics lesson I actually got was right here when I was a summer editor of the Daily News. We libeled someone, and I had to figure out how to do as little damage as possible from that point. And the only thing you've got is your credibility.
One of the things I've been good at is questioning my bosses on how are we covering ourselves as an institution, as an economic force in the community, and making sure that as journalists we don't forget that we have to cover ourselves as aggressively as we cover everybody else.
I did a story about a president who wasn't at a bank anymore, and I did a story about a very aggressive story about why he'd actually been fired, in which I quoted members of the board and a lot of different people. 4 years later, I got a call. I was then at the Chicago Sun-Times, and this gentleman wanted to call me in as an expert witness about the people I'd talked to. He hadn't worked in 4 years, and it was largely due to that story, which was accurate and quoted everyone, but I had to rethink my aggressiveness, what the tilt and my happiness about getting the story.
So I think it is to really scrutinize yourself and make sure you hold yourself to a higher standard and not get sloppy. And that's how you hear about some of these big plagiarism cases, and we've had one or two from interns at our paper in the past 4 years. And it begins with little things. You steal a little fact. If I'm doing a story, and occasionally I'll go onto the wires and look what someone else is writing about the same story, and occasionally I see a little thing that I don't have from my reporting that I wish I had. And you have to not let yourself even open that door of taking that without backing it up yourself, without doing it through your own reporting, because that opens a door, and you wonder, why on earth does someone plagiarize? Well, it kind of starts with smaller things, and then next thing you know, they're just making up names and putting fiction into the paper. So I try to, you just hold yourself to a high standard.
The press has had couple 100-year history of being the watchdog of government. It doesn't mean you have to be rude, but you respectfully can ask for records about those deals. The deal that the athletic department has with an athletic shoemaker, or the soda deal that they have. You can ask for what are the arrangements, how much money does the school get, what happens if sales fall. A lot of schools have started closing off the snack machines for certain periods of the day in an effort to fight obesity. So now what happens? You get less money going into those machines. What does that do? What is that money used for? All of that money, all of that information is public information, and you have a right to have it, and you have a right to tell the taxpayers, here's where your money goes, and here's what it's used for.
People like to read about controversy. They like to find out things they don't know. One way you do it is by digging.
Advisors are often intimidated by administrations who may not want these stories to be told, and they have to weigh the balance, and that's a very difficult thing for them. So I think that there are many good stories, and I think that they should encourage their students to look for those stories. But I think that they also, and I'm sure they're very aware of this, they're going to face obstacles that Vicki or I or Dan or anyone would not necessarily face.
I wish I had learned to read a balance sheet in school. I wish I had learned a dose of micro and macroeconomics in school. I think my education was fairly broad. I tried to taste as much of the campus as I could, everything from astronomy to logic to political science and everything in between. But I didn't have good direction, and I think that a good grounding in economics and marketing would be very helpful for students, aspiring journalists, and there is a huge opportunity for a journalist who has a business acumen or interest. The first requirement, of course, is to be a good reporter. That goes without saying. But one who understands how to ferret information out of seemingly dense tables in an annual report or a proxy statement or a quarterly report can go far and do well.
As business sections sometimes can be perceived narrowly, very focused on corporate strategies, and that's not what business is all about. Business is about emotions. Business is about greed. Business is about hope. Business is about fear, jealousy, envy. I mean, that's all part of what should show up in business sections.
The notion that somehow students of any age are insulated from the business world is really, it's not a good thing, because the business is affecting everyone, from their parents and teachers to themselves. And an awareness of that, if they're interested in journalism, will mean that they have many opportunities going forward, because one of the areas of growth in the journalism business is a demand for people who understand business and can write about business for people to read and to hear on broadcast media. So it's an area of opportunity, and an understanding of that will help them not only in their personal lives, but also in their professional lives.
Mm-hmm. Dana?
I would add to that business is important because many of the most important decisions that high schoolers are going to be making in the coming years, and really just a few years away, are going to have to do with looking at what the opportunities are for their jobs as they pick their majors, picking possible careers, and then even after college, where they may live, where are the opportunities for growth, and then as they move through their lives, what kind of investments are they going to have to make to save for the things they want to do with their life, to be able to basically achieve many of their dreams and put their own kids through college, and then you know, be able to have a comfortable retirement. And whether that's good or bad, a lot of the responsibility for all that is going to fall to each individual to plan and really use the economy to their advantage and the opportunities they're given. And so to do that properly, you really have to be a well-informed citizen. This touches the students from almost the minute they get up and decide what they're going to wear in the day and why they make those decisions. And you know, a lot of it to do with the way that they've been targeted by big companies to be marketed to, you know, the music they listen to, the products they use, the video games they play, the sports they choose, why they choose maybe extreme sports over playing baseball or something. A lot of it has to do with corporations marketing to young people in a very certain way.
I would suggest that teachers really try to get students involved in writing about phone cards or getting a cell phone or all these basic things that are a part of their daily life now, so they don't view it only as something that they're responsible for somewhere down the road. Unfortunately, many students graduate from college thinking that money comes to them the same way they were once told that the stork delivered babies. It just comes and they call and ask for a little more. And maybe they'll have a part-time job and work a little bit, but they don't understand the mechanisms. And the long run, it's a problem not only for them as journalists, but it's a problem for them in life, because they don't understand some of these basic tenets about how things work. That's why it's so important. It's helping them in a lot of ways.
Why financial journalism in sports?
Well, I think it's interesting that to consider, if you look at the sports landscape today, I think business reporters are as well equipped as anyone else to cover sports in many respects when you consider the salaries and, as Andrew said, the stadium issues and all of the related financial issues that are tied to athletics. But for us, sports is a beat because one, Indianapolis is a hub for sports activity, and there are national governing bodies that are there. The Colts and the Pacers are there. there are a number of other related entities that are tied into athletics in Indianapolis. But our reporter doesn't spend any time at games. He doesn't have press passes to any of the events, but he spends a lot of time talking with people who are involved in the sports and covers them from the aspect of the effect on the community, the effect within the business community, and what happens in the relationships between the people who are running the sports organizations and those of us who consume what they produce.
Why do we care about these folks going to jail? It doesn't affect us. Well, these folks have affected a lot of people who put their life savings into their companies, who believed in them. And in many cases, they were lied to. And it's because of journalists, people like you, now and in the future, who will find what was done wrong.
If you don't have trust in an economy, there's really almost nothing left. And if you look at the areas of the world where the economies are the worst and where poverty is the worst, usually those are the most corrupt areas where everything is done on the sly, where there's all kinds of insider information being passed along, the same people benefit and the same mass of people lose. And if we can hold business leaders, just as we try to hold government leaders accountable for their decisions and how they're paid for them, that's an important step of keeping the integrity and trust of our financial institutions that we all depend on basically for our livelihood.
There's a lot of opportunity online, and when someone thinks about a career, they shouldn't only think of pure print or even pure broadcast or whatever. There's going to be a confluence of these things in the future, and there's going to be contraptions that pull a lot of things together, and that's why people should be able to understand each of these mediums is different. You just don't take a newspaper story and read it on the air, and you don't just take a newspaper story and throw it on a website. There's different ways. There's interactivity, there are links, there's a lot of ways to shorten your thoughts, and so everyone who is teaching students should teach the different ways that these mediums present themselves, and they should be ready and equipped for any of them.
At the age of 35, Daniel Lee covers a vital beat for the San Jose Mercury News, one of the nation's best newspapers. Cyber intrigue. His world is full of worms and hackers and viruses. In this interview with J Ideas, Lee talks about his work and life and how he got from Ball State University to the West Coast at the Mercury News.
How would you suggest generating story ideas?
Right. I think it's great for students to sit down with other students on the high school newspaper, their friends, and really just kind of brainstorm and get talking about the things that they would like to see when they look through their favorite magazines or publications or their favorite websites. What kind of stories do they read? And after they read those stories, what kinds of things are they like, well, I'd like to know a little bit more, or this was a national publication talking about this. I wonder how this may be either like this or different from this in our own community. And kind of go from there. I think we really develop story ideas from just talking. Being a journalist is really all about having good relationships with a lot of people, because a journalist is really only as good as his or her sources. And so that includes even going out to your favorite stores where you buy things. Talk to the sales clerks, talk to the manager. What's really important? What is really the hot sellers? What do they keep running out of in stock, and why? And how do they, stock their inventory that way? Where do they put stuff in the store to, to sell things? How things are arranged on shelves to get the most attention from customers. A lot of students have part-time jobs, and that's another great issue that they can look at. And talk to their boss about hiring practices and how hot the market is, and what they look for in employees, and how long students tend to stay in those jobs. And so I would encourage the students to get to talk to each other and the people within their business world, really, to get story ideas and topics and formulate what they're going to write about.
With all stories, there are legal implications when writing. Is this even an even bigger issue with business reporting?
It can be. I think first, with being a journalist, you have to realize that in a way we're a privileged group of people, that we get access to information that most people don't don't have, and it's our job to bring that information accurately to our readers. And it's not something we can be reckless about, and we have to take it very seriously. And at the most serious of that is, being fair. And there are legal implications of that. You can't libel someone if if you hate a business, or if you hear a rumor about a business or someone who works for it. You can't just put that in without checking it out and making sure it's true and giving the person a chance to respond if you are going to print it. But if you dig a little bit, you can really come up with interesting things, and really, to realize to get at the people behind these stories. And I cover a lot of technology issues, which can be very technical and boring if you don't delve a little deeper and get to know some of the people behind them. I think high school students should try to write for their peers and for fellow high school students. So take a look at what is important first with themselves and to their friends and the fellow students, what kinds of trends that involve businesses, how are they being marketed to by companies, what kind of products do they buy, and take a look at why do they like what they like, why do they spend their hard-earned money on certain things and not in other areas. Write about issues, maybe saving for college, some financial issues that way. So I would look just very specifically at the interests and the issues that are important to kids like them. There are other legal implications in writing about companies you have to realize, and I think one important distinction is to realize the difference between a public company and a private company. And a public company is a company that actually has stock that is traded on the stock market. And so you can find it in the newspaper stock page, or you can go to the internet and look up the stock price that way. And it's a little bit different from you can get more information on those companies. They're required by law to disclose certain sorts of information, like how much money they make, how much money they spend. So there's legal implications that way. But I think the biggest thing to remember is really just to be responsible and fair, and just take your job really serious about what you're writing about. And you can have fun with feature stories, but when you have controversial facts especially, you just have to take great care that you're fair and do things appropriately.
What do high school students really need to know about business reporting?
I think they really need to know that it's a big emerging area that is actually very exciting, and the same principles apply to business journalism that really apply to all types of journalism, and that's just to develop good skills at digging up the facts, making sometimes complicated information very readable and understandable, and relating why things are important to a wide range of people, and also doing it in a lively way. You can use the same sorts of many feature techniques in business reporting than you can in any other type. This field involves a lot of interesting people, a lot of very creative people, controversial things, fun things, trend stories. I would just really emphasize that it's a kind of a booming, exciting area.